Hi guys, it's Chris Beaver again. I thought for this tutorial we'll start off by discussing guitars and how to go about getting a sound that's very usable for a recording environment. Tone is a very touchy subject in itself. I mean, what you might like, someone else might not. You know, it's very subjective. However, when you're recording, subjective things aside, there are some golden rules that apply to everything. And generally speaking, the more tracks you play in your project, the less room the guitars will have to breathe. If you've got loads of keys, multiple layers of drums, you could have multiple layers of keys, loads of vocals. The more you put in, it's almost like the weaker your guitar sound has to be, yet you still want it to sound powerful in the mix. The mistakes I see a lot of people make is they generally make the guitar sound too big. The guitar sounds that I use for recording, I would not practice with those sounds because they wouldn't be desirable for me to do that. But you have to generally take all the flub off the bottom. And let me just okay, I'll just go into a guitar track here from the same project that was on the last video I've done, so you can hear. Now, I'll explain something about this. Basically, for me to run the screen capture software that I'm using to record this video, and for me to play this project, which is over 80 tracks at the same time, was giving my computer a few issues. So some of the plugs I applied have now been processed within to save computer CPU power. Basically, with this sound here, I've just playing a very simple line, and I have a delay set to 462 milliseconds, or a quarter note of the project BPM, which is 130. Generally, if I play a rhythm, if I play a lead, if I play anything, it at least has 2 tracks playing the exact same thing. And by 2 tracks, I don't mean doing a guitar track and then doubling it with your DAW and panning it and stuff like that, because that will never work. The reason double tracking works is because no matter how hard you try, you can't play the same thing exactly 2 times in a row. Although your aim when you're playing it is to do so, just the way it is, you can't do that. So in this particular project, let's take this track, which is left, and this is the another guitar take doing the exact same thing on the right. Let's play these together so you can hear how fat they sound. And basically, I've panned them 100% left and right. So the first guitar track would be totally left, the second would be totally right. There are other little tricks you could do. You could use you could change the timing by a few milliseconds of the one to give you a bigger stereo image. I've never been a fan of that particular sound, but many people are, and a lot of people use it and have done for years, so that could be worth experimenting with. If you're using Cubase, the easy way to do that would be this here. It's basically how you can slip the time, and something like 8 milliseconds would be adequate. You'd play with that, but it's something worth bearing in mind. Let's play these 2 guitar takes together so you can hear what they actually sound like. Okay, so you'll see from that it's very basic guitar sounds that work. Generally speaking, you don't want to use too much distortion. A lot of people will use loads of distortion thinking it's going to give them power, but it actually has the opposite effect. The power comes from within layering clear guitar tracks. You know, you want to hear the definition of what you're playing. You don't want that to be drowned out by having them too saturated. And you might do a single track of guitar and you might think, well, it just doesn't sound powerful. Well, do 2, do 3, do 4, do more, keep layering them, and they will suddenly have this huge powerful sound that there's no way you will ever get a sound like that through simply, you know, programming your effect modeler or your amp, you know, to give you a fatter, more saturated sound. I'll add that as far as modelers and that go, they're all very good now, you know. I mean, on this project I've used mainly Design 11 rack. I've also some parts where I've used my XFX Ultra. I haven't used the Pod HD on this particular track. However, if I was just restricted to using that would have been fine also. They all have the pros and cons, and they all sound a bit different to each other, and they all have their own uniquenesses, really. And, you know, I think what I'm trying to say is, don't ever think something sounds great because it's going through this really good modeler, because you can get sounds from freeware that sound brilliant, freeware amp sims that don't cost you anything, and they sound brilliant if you use them correctly. Okay, so there's the couple of guitar tracks. I will add with this, I actually have added no EQ whatsoever, simply because I believe that this applies to everything, not just guitars. Your source signal that you put in is everything. If you record something that's less than perfect tonally, sure, you can well, fix it with EQ, and there's lots of little tricks, plugs, and, you know, just from general editing that you could do to fix it. But I find if you do that, you're fighting the mix to start with, and really, if you want to be EQing, it really should be to enhance things and not necessarily to fix them. So it's worth going the extra time to get a good basic guitar sound from your modeler, which would generally mean not too much flub. Just get it how you want it, but don't have it ridiculously saturated. If you did have too much flub, let's go into like this guitar. Let's just solo the 1. I mean, I don't need to do this on this, but if you did have too much, you could generally, let's say you had too much bass, then you could just put a high pass filter, which will take anything below whatever frequency you set. So anything below that, it will cut off. And that's probably the most crucial area of guitars, because you don't really want them messing too much with the bass frequencies at all, really. And okay, now I'll play these guitars in a mix. I'll tell you what I'll do. I will mute the bass guitar so you can hear just how kind of I don't like to use the word thin because they're very rich, but just how much bottom they don't have, even though it appears they have got it in the mix. So I'll play this, then I'll remove the bass, and you'll hear what I mean. Okay, now because I want to keep this relatively short because of YouTube's time restrictions, that's pretty much all I've got to say about guitars. Really, is just be careful about how much saturation you're using. Where possible, if you're going to use effects, try not to use them in your modeler unless, or amp, unless it's a specific effect that you would definitely want first. Like if you wanted your guitar compressed, it'll have a very different effect if you compress it after you recorded it than if you compressed it from your guitar to compressor to amp. And obviously things like whammy pedals, you know, specific things, wahs, you would need to record them with that, because if you add them later they will sound totally different because of they're at the arse end of the chain really rather than the front. Okay, now you'll notice from looking at this, like all these tracks I have here, they're in bits, they're in snippets, and I'll typically record everything like this. I don't necessarily play them in these snippets. Sometimes I'll play, you know, 3/4 of the way through on one track, and then I will cut them and move them to different tracks, so I can easier manipulate certain parts. Because when I'm mixing things, I like to constantly change, very subtly. I like to constantly change how things are interacting with the mix. I wouldn't just get a guitar, set it to a level, and that's it. I'll split it into different parts. Okay, let's try and go through some of these parts. I'm just trying to think of something useful to show you. On the last video I touched on drums. I don't really want to touch on those too much today, but I will say, although I use Superior Drummer, there are other great alternatives, like BFD2 is great. It's arguably using BFD2 that they kind of sound more raw, more like miking up an actual drum kit really. So if you were using that, there's more steps you would need to mix it, but it's nothing difficult at all. Also, with your drums, if you had what you could do is double your snare. Like you could use one software to play your drum track with all your drums and everything in it, and you could like then double it with another software, or even another snare drum from the same software, and just bounce down a different snare, add it as a WAV, and blend it within your track. So that could work. That does work very well as well. There's something I tend to use with drums a lot, and this is really what gives my sound a major thing, because I use it on everything. I use timpani all the time, because I absolutely love them. I think every drum kit should have one. Yeah, I'm not gonna touch too much on drums. I'll talk a little bit about editing guitars. With whatever DAW you're using, to be honest, they're pretty much the same now these days. They have the same. They have different ways of achieving the same thing. Just some things to look out for, which you can often hear on recordings. Just some things to watch out for is when you're cutting a track. Now, do you see this blue marker here? When you're cutting a track, this is basically a fade line of volume. If you don't do this when you're cutting stuff, you'll have this like kind of pop and click every time there's an end or a start. There's a real high chance of getting a pop or a click. So if you add a little fade in at the beginning and at the end of every chunk of audio you've got, you'll get rid of that pop and click. If you ever think, well, there's a pop and click there, but you can't really tell when the rest of the mix is there, believe me, you can. And should you be professionally mixing it with something like Wavelab after you've completed your mix, that will pick it up full of errors. It will pick up everything. So it's just a really simple but useful tip on everything. And just because you're using a fade line, actually, it doesn't mean your guitar will fade in, because you're doing it by milliseconds. You can't tell. It just takes away that nasty click noise. Now, on this, I have various layers of guitar on this mix. What's that one? I'm not sure. Okay. Actually, while I'm here, I'll touch on the vocals, because you might be listening to the vocals thinking, why the hell is he using such a long reverb on the voice? And actually, I'm not. It's not how it appears. I'll show it you within the track. It's here's the vocal track. Basically, I'm using. I've done many things to balance the levels of the vocals out, and I find it easier to do this by having the vocals in a separate project with a quick bounce down of the main project, just to get things like leveling, limiting, compression, get everything just right. And then when I've done that, I then import them mixed into the main project and then polish them from there. The reverb you're hearing from here is basically from this Soundtoys plugin, which is fantastic, the crystallizer. I have a gated reverb, which means it only decays like that when there's no vocals happening. When vocals are going on,
days down hazy times drown out that empty space.
See this line here, when it lets go, it opens up the threshold.
Just leave me here, I'll make my branded
Right, here's something I'll show you, which can really help from getting from one place of your song to another without it sounding disjointed. I do this a lot. I've basically got a reversed guitar here, and if I put that in context of the mix, you'll hear what it's doing. It's basically riding to the next bit. It's not meant to be in your face. It's just subtle, and it helps get to the next bit without it sounding. It helps it more smoothly. Okay, now just so you know how to do that, this is all I've literally done. I mean, here's the original. I've just literally got a guitar chord, in this case an E, and just hit it once and let it fade. I then do it on another track, do the exact same thing, and pan those tracks 100% left and right, and you will end up with okay. So from there, I will literally reverse them. I might have my reverse one here. If you're curious how to do that, on Cubase, you would just literally select them both, right click, you would go to process, and where have we gone? Here, you'd have reverse, and it will reverse the audio. I don't need to do that as I'd already done it. But here's what it sounds like reversed. Now, the most important thing about that is the way it ends. You have to, when you're recording it, you have to be cock on with hitting the note at exactly more or less the same time. Now from here, let's say, I mean, that's way too long for what I wanted, so I'll just show you basically how I did it. You just like reduce the length to any given length that you want, and then you would use these blue markers here as a volume swell, and you swell right up to the point of what you of the next part of the track. Let's zoom in on this a bit more so you can see what I'm doing. So you have this line here swelling, and let's get snap off. And just at the end, you don't want to pop, you don't want to click of any kind. And this will give you this nice automated volume swell. And of course at the end of that, you'd have you know, it would be leading to a hit. So some very actually I do that when I tend to do that. I also do it with cymbals. In this case, I've also done it with a gong, I believe. Here we go. This is the exact same technique, whereas I've literally had a gong sample and reversed it and swelled it in the exact same way I've just showed. Okay, now I'll play them together again so you can. Now I'll briefly touch on the keys in here. There's quite a lot of keys going on in here. I always use orchestral instruments in all of my music. With this particular track, I've also added more, I suppose you'd call it modern synthesis, which is something I don't normally do, but I just wanted to do something a little different, really. With all my keys, I write them the same way I showed you with drums, really. I would write my keys in a piano roll. It can take a very long time. But there you go. I don't want to delve too much into that, as I've already gone on about that. But let's have a look. Let's have a look. When you're working with this many tracks, it's a good idea really to use folders and put all your guitars in a folder, or your group tracks even, you know, in a folder as well, and as you can generally manage it a lot better. I've not really done a lot of that in this because I've got a very sloppy workflow. Okay, let's take this bit of keyboard here so you can hear what's actually happening. So let me find my track I used for Hallion. Okay. Okay, on this bit here. I've programmed, I'll just solo it. I've programmed just simple octaves, and it just has a very slight delay on the end. You'll notice again, like I did with the drums, I've made them slightly out of time, like I've made it come in a bit earlier. In particular, this helps because this particular sound isn't a dead straight sound. It's got a tinier swell to it when you hit the key, so to compensate for that, I've made every other note slightly earlier than I would have if it didn't have a swell, just to make up for that. Now, if I solo this, you can just hear what it's. Very simple. We're not worrying about dynamics in this. It's more for effect. Now I'll show you how. Okay, I'll show you here how to use automation with that. Basically in Cubase, I mean, this is the audio channel for Halion, which was just that keys that you just heard. Now, in Cubase, if you put the pointer to the bottom here, and you'll see this little thing here, show hide automation. You can open an automation track. You can open as many as you like, and then once you've opened one, you can select here what you want it to do. You can, with a mouse, adjust any parameter of any instrument, anything that's available. You can adjust anything, and if it's not in the list here, you just like go in and you can tell it what parameter exactly you're looking for, and that will happen in any of your plugs. I find it much easier to do it this way than rather than, you know, you can do it manually. You can tell it to record. You can tell it to record your automation movements that you're making with your slider or using with your mouse in real time. And this way is easier because you've got precise control. Now with this, I've made these lines as the cutoff. So these that I've drawn in here are just generally affecting the cutoff resonance of Halion. Now if I open up Halion, you'll see how smoothly it's happening. You would never do it that smooth with your hand, not in a million years, or even with a controller knob. Now, again, by adding that, it keeps things changing during the mix. Let's play it in perspective.
This shaky heart reaches to grasp. Spelled frame I see we can buy me. They stand hazy, times drown out that empty space. Just leave me here. I'll make my mind
Okay, so something I'll touch on that I didn't mention. If you have multiple guitar tracks, or actually multiple anything tracks, it's generally a good idea once you have several of them to make a group channel, you know, project, add track, group channel, and once they're in a group channel, you could then, like in this case, these are going to my 11 rack group bus, just so you could have, I don't know, however many tracks you've got, all start and stop from one single click, so it would mute and solo them all at the same time. Also, you could apply, if you wanted a single reverb or something over the lot of them. Obviously, it makes a lot more sense to put them in a group and use it that way than individually put reverb on each individual one. Okay, let's go to now. Okay, it's kind of interesting that the middle of this. Let me put my snap back on so I know what I'm doing and get rid of that. There's quite a lot going on in the middle of this. I'll kind of separate this down so you can see how it was done. So I have the drums and timpani. I'll add the bass in. Right. I have a vibraphone going on here in the background.
You can never find truth.
And there's strings.
The deep
Yeah, this was this particular track's from a preset on the Axe Effects, actually, called Crystal Echoes, which I've just slightly modified to fit the needs of what I wanted for this song. But it's a beautiful sound. Which, incidentally, that Sound Toys plug I showed you earlier can do that every single bit as good. Again, there's a gong swell leading to this part to give it the right kind of texture. The difference with this gong swell, where we gone here, is it's reversed as I showed you earlier, but then after it's been reversed, there's a standard gong 2 going forward just to give it that, you know, so it has a hit. Okay, other things going on here. There's quite a lot happening here. I have a vibraphone kicking off in the background. In fact, I'll okay, this is something else I want to touch on that I do a lot. If I have different verses, different choruses, I make sure they're all different to each other, and They're not necessarily in a noticeable way. What I'm always after is richness in sound and a constant moving mix, that things keep changing order of, preference, rather than being static. It kind of gives you a more 3D mix. In the case of this, I've added, I'll show you a little line that you won't pick out by itself, but once I played it, you'll hear it in the mix and just see what it does. Let's play with it first, and then I'll go back and point out the bit I'm talking about. Okay, on that we've got a staccato brass. It's going ba da ba 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 da ba ba ba. That's enough of my awful singing. Let me solo. Now that was actually done via MIDI, but I've bounced it to WAV to save computer power. Now you've just heard that, you hear it in the mix, and now you'll suddenly hear it. It's little things like that, lots of them, that really help make your mix come alive. I mean, I'll mute that. Very subtle, and it all works. I think that's about it, really. I mean, this isn't so much a tutorial on how to do everything. I really don't have the time for that, but there was a lot of people asking me just to show them what I do and what works for me, and I hope you find some of this helpful. And if you'd like to see more of these in the future, but maybe way more in depth, or even simpler on specific subjects, send me a message. I might not be able to get back to you, but I do read them all. But it's just, when I have too many messages, it just becomes a chore to answer everybody, and I don't like being ignorant or appearing to be rude at all. So, but I do read every message I have. So thanks for watching, and I hope it's been of some help. Cheers.
Left away.